Julie, good?
Good morning, and thank you for joining us. Bonjour, et merci de vous joindre à nous. My name is Kathy Parks. Today we gather in person and online to honor all Canadians that we have lost due to neglect in our long-term care homes. We've placed shoes on the Parliament lawn. One pair of shoes represents 4 people that we have lost this year in long-term care. We have over 2,000 pairs of shoes today. We have gathered to ask the elected leaders of our provinces and territories to work with our federal government to create national standards for long-term care. I'd like to begin by welcoming an elected elder, Fred McGregor, who will be opening the ceremony with a prayer. Fred, I present to you this gift, and we thank you for being here today.
Say good morning, everyone, and Kathy, thank you very much for the for the gift. Also, was requested to fill in for this event, and for everyone, this is a very serious event, and it's a very serious gathering. And I guess for everybody, for all of Canada, and for everyone around the world, we know what's happening in the pandemic. And this is very serious. And we know who are the victims. The first victims in this pandemic are a lot of our elders in the care homes. And one of the things is, when I was asked to come and do the acknowledgement, I wasn't too sure of the proximity and wearing masks and everything else. But when Kathy mentioned, she says, I asked her how is she involved in this. She says, well, I'm organizing, but she told me something very personal, and the very personal thing that she said was that in April, just this past April, she says, I lost my father, my grandfather, and the person she loved very much basically died alone because we know of the lockdown. So with that, I made the back of my neck, the hair stand up. And also very, very here because I had grandparents, but I know friends and relatives as well. And for everyone across Canada, we know what's happening with the elder population. So with that, I'm going to do a quick acknowledgement and do a few words for everyone that's here, in the representing of the shoes. Represents of the individuals that were lost in long-term care homes. Break kina. Jemi do no way in which time Jemi get on Jeno. On Jemi get on watch Guinness. Ngegos. Thank you guys, Kakanaki guys, it's again, Oshima. We in this time you get to J. Today say I'm going to watch long Roman. Thank you get to J. You might do it. We didn't get to J. You get Kakanaki guys, it's again. You guys, it's again. On Chicago Kai test, on Kai can they sit on Kai take. But deep not take. We didn't get to get to J. The keys. We gustan ju get guy ton in a king. We gustan ju get guy ton on shma keep matsuin. Can I wish matsuin? On ju get on je neo ni jo ga dejik, neo ga dejik, mat gejik matsuin. We gustan ju get. Tang ju get on je ne get sim nanik. Chayam nanik. We gustan ju get. You guys together. You get on Jake the keys, Mods win on some mortgage. You get stongs you get. J. Way, gonna fall and then call now. Watch. We get to me, you get on J. Margo and Mount J. They way, gonna be fogging. We get stongs you get on Jake Cockanaggage. Mike save an ocean mortgage. Once you get, job no G shock. Wanted to see what. I can't do cage. Can't waste in the season. We ain't just talking to you guys. Cooking guys, it's a gay. Okay, what kind of gossip? Waiting gets to me, gets you knock the wall. Kakana guys, it's again, or man, waiting gets to me, gets. Waiting, or man, gets. You might say, man, you know, John is when I motion, man, gets. I say the one, opposite one. Hey, no, because we don't push not into Mushkauzi, aren't you? You can't, we might it again, or man, you guys, it's again, you it again. Ja, als je maar goed zat toen aan dat keeper aan. En als toen aan. En dan dan we in iets kwijt aan, als je maar goed weet, wat je mee goed. Je gaat goed guys together. We goed to me goed, to me goed, to me goed, to me goed. Jig. That's just a general acknowledgement for the day. For all that's been provided, for everything that's living and for everything that's here, that we breathe another day. But one of the things is we have a challenge. We have a sickness that is here and we all have a challenge. And we look around, what is lost is considerable. And it's our elders and our seniors that are taking the brunt of this. I will do a second one, a few words for the elders and seniors. This is for all the colors of seniors and elders. We see what happens in the non-Indigenous areas, what's happening in the long-term care homes. It hasn't come to our communities yet, but it's coming for many things. So, I'm going to do it. Die neue Jig, als je maar het seems all one. Man, nee, als je maar kan de cage. Hey, nou, because neue Jig en neue door man. Neue bouw bestaan, ik als maar het seems dan, ik als maar niet snap je het seems dan. Chai am dan, ik als maar. Hey, nou, because we don't push into the skouzi, als je shop we, met als je maar goed afgezet. Het is een beetje bemantie, als je maar goed. You know, because we don't push into shop we on wait and get to me good. This is for all of the elders, both indigenous, non-indigenous, and all the colors. That you ask the Creator to look after everyone. Those that have passed on, especially those that have passed on. In the Shike, they died alone or they couldn't have family members. It is a very sad time. The Creator, I asked the Creator that they look after all, it doesn't matter what color.
Something happened to the connection and then the screen turned off.
Because they gave us life. And we still have to look after them as best as we can. And one of the things in the Anishinaabe way, when we started here, I went around, I smudged the whole area, and I dropped tobacco. And we had a drummer here, Thielen Keknoswe. We did an honor song. And what we're going to do here is do a second song. We're going to get him to come up, and he's going to do a traveling song for all of those senior and elder spirits that are traveling. Doesn't matter what color, what nationality. They're traveling in that spirit world. Because things happen here that we got to take care of, but that they can hear our song and they're still in our hearts, just like Kathy, for her dad, her grandfather, and all the relatives, for each and every one of you. You keep them in your minds and in your hearts, but you be responsible for all of this that's happening. So, Thielen. much, Thalen. Remember, you have elders and seniors. Don't forget them in the long-term care homes. We have to get back to looking after them because our system is overwhelmed and all of our workers. So we have to go back to those care homes to help and assist as much as we can, what we can. My name is Fred Cobblenishan McGregor, an Indigenous cause Fred Cobblenishan McGregor. I want me on the knee, I key the don't and I key and get the gun ZB. You get you be shy, you go to my like to say, and I ain't want me on the knee, I key. This is unceded Algonquin territory. And one of the things is in the protocol and the understanding is that we welcome everybody. And with this one here, I'll get our speaker here, Kathy. Kathy, come on up. This is on Parliament Hill and unceded area as well. But because of your loss, it is very important that we do this and that we share this, and that you share your story. I didn't mean to, but it's important because there is a living aspect to this. And it's a loved one that you love very much. So with that, this takes care of for my end, and the rest will you take care of your end. But we're all in this together. We'll get through this. So keep wearing the mask, wash the hands, keep the distance, and don't be scared if you have to stay home. We know what's happening, and we'll see what's happening at south of the border as well. But this is serious stuff, but we'll live through it because we live through others. Miigwech!
Canadian who has lost a loved one this year due to neglect and long-term care, I feel that my path forward and my reason for being here is clear. Through the sadness of the past several months, I've had the opportunity to hear stories similar to mine from family members across the country. Our stories may differ in detail, but the common thread of neglect, abuse, and loneliness never seems to lose its impact. Those of us who have lost loved ones this year have spent so much time grieving as one would normally do. But we've also been dealing with the aftermath of a system gone so horribly wrong. The mental anguish that accompanies our loss has only been increased by circumstances that were out of our control. It may be timely to focus on the thousands of families across the country who have been impacted by COVID-19 in our long-term care homes this year. But when we look at the true impact of our long-term care systems over the decades, it's heartbreaking to think that millions of lives have been affected by what we have allowed to go on for far too long. Our country has heard the brave stories from families for months, but throughout there has been a collective voice that has been silenced.
Okay, I'm up.
There are those we need to hear from, those whose experiences have left them mentally anguished and heartbroken as well. This is why it's my privilege today to share with you the voice of two Canadian PSWs who are brave enough to speak and who want you to hear what they have to say. The first person says, as long as I've been working in long-term care, it has always been short-staffed. Short-staffed has become normal. COVID-19 has exposed the cracks in long-term care, cracks that PSWs have been trying to highlight for many years. The pandemic made the shortcomings worse as procedures changed by the minute, and we were just struggling to keep afloat. What we see in long-term care is institutional living. Our residents are aging, and instead of living their golden years being happy with the care and comfort they need, they are having to live by waiting. I want to say that I have many wonderful residents who treat me like I'm one of the family. You can't help but bond with your residents. You see them almost every day, you know their families and they know you. The banter and the friendships are genuine. You know their habits, what they like and what they don't like. You become a part of their lives. When they are gone, they take a piece of you with them, and you grieve because you have loved them. Many PSWs speak out for each other and our residents, but it doesn't seem to make a difference. We make recommendations and suggestions. We get angry and we push back, but the answer is always, where will the money come from? The reply infers that we should stop asking because we aren't going to get what we're asking for. Being afraid to speak up isn't the problem. The problem is that when we do, we just aren't being heard. Every day we risk our lives and those of our families by going into work. We work in prime conditions to contract and spread COVID-19. Being a PSW right now is terrifying, and I don't think anyone is doing anything to protect us. We're losing our skilled and highly qualified PSWs. They're leaving for better paying jobs, which leaves us taking anyone willing to work in long-term care. Lack of training and preparedness for this job then causes a massive revolving door. We cannot seem to keep anyone long enough in long-term care to sustain the sector. My story as a PSW is the same as many out there. The constant struggle to be heard, to advocate for my residents, co-workers, and myself. I beg you to hear me. Listen to our hearts when we say we need help. We are burned out and trying our best to hold on. It's not for us alone, but for the residents that need us and for our families that we leave every day to provide for. We need to fix long-term care. The bottom line cannot be profit-driven. Do the right thing. Help us take care of the many men and women who have served and made Canada the country that it is today. The second PSW, I posed 2 questions to. What could your home have done better? She replies, in the beginning, they should have provided staff with PPE. It took too long for management to provide the PPE needed. Once it was provided, the issues calmed down, but at present time, we still do not have enough PPE. The second question I asked her is, what was it like for you? What is it like for you as a PSW worker in a nursing home during this pandemic? Her reply is, it is hell. It's hell working in a nursing home. It's awful. It's terrible. Every morning when we go into work, you hear of someone else who's died. During your shift, you hear of another 2 or 3 residents who have passed away. It's stressful also that we have to prepare the bodies and bring them out to the paramedics. They won't come into the home. That has been difficult, and there's just been so many deaths every day. I haven't gotten over that. It's very emotional and very stressful, especially knowing when you might be the next person who could end up in the ICU. I don't talk about it much, but it rests on my mind all the time. It has affected me very badly because one of my close friends and colleagues contracted COVID-19 from working in the home. She was in ICU for a long time on a ventilator, and we didn't know if she would survive. What people don't know is the tremendous guilt that we feel every day, knowing we might be the ones spreading the virus to the people that we care so much about. In reading these comments, it struck me how many similarities there are between family members and long-term care staff. We all want what's best for our loved ones. We all see the need for change. We all have grieved the losses that are so unnecessary. We are all struggling with the weight of mental anguish that this year and the decades prior have brought. We all agree that national standards need to be implemented for long-term care. We need accountability as well. We look to our provincial, territorial, and federal governments to make this a reality. Thank you. And now I would like to introduce from the Quebec Nurses Association, Natalie Steak-Doucette.
Hi, I'm going to do this in anglais, if you don't mind. Je m'appelle Nathalie Steak-Doucette, je suis présidente de l'Association québécoise d'infirmières. I didn't think I needed this, so thank you to the organizers. I've been a nurse for 10 years, and the few months I spent in long-term care in Quebec were every professional nightmare I have ever had come true. Sorry. Petite calice, pardon. I remember one afternoon I was starting my shift, and at the very same time the TV was always open. because we would listen to the press conferences of the provincial and the federal government. And at the same time that the provincial healthcare minister was telling us we have enough PPE, our coordinator was coming to tell us that we had run out of gowns. And we tried calling people, we tried emailing people, and finally it was friends, dentist friends, who had to have their cabinets closed, that drove us in their truck boxes of gowns. So they were there for us. Our colleagues reached out when we needed them, but we felt abandoned. We felt the residents were abandoned, we were abandoned, and we did everything we were supposed to. We did everything we could. We looked at the research, we looked at best practices, we called politicians, we called the heads of the healthcare establishment. All this for free. This was on top of the backbreaking and the heartbreaking work that we had to do every single day, day in and day out. And still, we were lucky if we got even an accusé de réception, somebody who actually acknowledged that they received our emails. And it's still happening in Quebec. You know, we're up to over 6,000 deaths now, 5,500 of those in long-term care. Where I worked, only for a few weeks before I got sick, we lost almost half the residents in 3 months. Nobody has ever seen anything like this. We did not sign up for this. We do the work, but you have to listen to us. You can't. We need PPE, we need staff, and we need staff that stays in the same long-term care. We know in Quebec that BC, for example, was able to stop the movement of personnel from one healthcare establishment to another. Some healthcare institutions right now won't hire nurses unless you work full-time, because apparently it's too complicated to do the scheduling. Why won't they hire part-time people? We need every single person, even if they're only going to work 1 day a week. If you need to hire more administrators to do better scheduling, do it. People are dying. People are getting sick. And you always think, you know, when something really bad happens, that's when policies change. That's when you're like, it took this tragedy and finally something's going to happen. But nothing has happened. This is the second wave, and we're doing the exact same thing that we've done in the first wave. I don't know what more we can do. The nurses union has blocked bridges in Quebec. I mean, what are we supposed to do? You know, we're heartbroken, but we're angry also now, and we have every right to be angry. This anger comes from a place of justice, from a place of care, and from a place that's professional also. This is not normal that as nurses, that I'm the one that has to call a friend to bring me gowns for me and my colleagues. It's not normal that we can't reach a manager because there's nobody on the floor to help us out. So yes, we need national norms, but we also need a watchdog, because I don't want this to be just another tragedy that the next government can blame on the previous government. Because that's what they do every time. In Quebec, every election, and even on the federal level, every government blames a lot of stuff on the previous one. But we need to have healthcare workers, we need nurses, we need families, and we need residents to be involved in setting up a watchdog to make sure that the money is going to the right place, that the promises that are made are kept. Because it's nice to be, you get a new government and then they say, yeah, we're going to put 20 million in 5 years. A year after the next election. That's not how it should work. We need to keep our decision makers accountable. And healthcare workers now, please, everybody, please be careful. Stay home if you can. Wear a mask. But hold your politicians accountable. I don't know how much longer healthcare workers in Quebec especially can handle working day in, day out, working 16-hour shifts, sometimes 15, 16, 18 days in a row. That is not a rhythm that is sustainable long term. We can't keep it up. We're not heroes, we're not angels, we are humans. And as humans, we need sleep, we need food, we need social contact, we need friends. We need to be able to grieve, and that's what a lot of us have not been able to do, and that's why I want to thank the organizers today, because I realize I have not been able to do that either. And we need time to grieve. It's not something that you can just forget about, because you see people dying, but they're not pretty deaths. They're not peaceful deaths. And that's not what we signed up for. There's only so much we can do. So please, before we get too angry, before all of us just leave, please listen. And please actually do something. Because a lot of us, we don't want just a tap on the back. We want action, and we need action. It's not a choice. We need action yesterday. So whatever you can do now, write to your MPs, write to your healthcare establishments, anything. But we need help. We can't hold this up anymore. And I just want to say a shout out to my buddies I worked with, Catherine, Evelyn, Claire, everybody that I worked with who are still there. Thank you, and I'm here for you guys today. So, thanks.
Thank you, Natalie, for reminding us that heroes are humans too. We really need to support our nursing, our PSWs, our frontline staff. This is a lot about residents, but it's also about them because they're still going in there every day. Next, I would like to introduce, on behalf of the Canadian Health Coalition, a representative of Ottawa Health Coalition, Nancy Parker.
We stand here with the families and residents, care workers, and professionals in long-term care, and with all Canadians in expressing our deepest sorrow for the loss of more than 6,000 long-term care residents as a result of complications due to COVID-19. Words cannot adequately capture the meaning of their loss to our communities. We join you in grieving, and we join you in your urgent call for national standards for long-term care. The COVID-19 pandemic has exposed extraordinary heroism, selflessness, compassion, and resilience in our healthcare system. It has brought to the forefront the immeasurable value of public health care in Canada and its foundational principles of equity and compassion. At the same time, it has laid bare unconscionable inequities and shortfalls in care. As a nation, we must address these with the utmost urgency. The Canadian Health Coalition is calling for national standards that set consistent standards of care and staffing levels across the country. This strategy should include dedicated federal funding to the province and territories as part of the Canada Health Transfer. National standards as a condition of federal funding that are similar to the criteria in the Canada Health Act. Seniors' care should be universal, public, comprehensive, accessible, and portable. A human resources strategy to guarantee a skilled seniors care workforce and decent working conditions for care workers. While families, healthcare workers, and communities are struggling to support each other, corporate interests are trying to profit. More than 17,000 residents and more than 10,000 staff in long-term care have been infected with COVID-19. In both the first wave of the pandemic and in the second wave to date, across Canada, infection rates and death rates as a result of COVID-19 are far higher in homes owned by for-profit corporations. The level of care revealed in a number of these homes is a travesty, and it underscores the perils of for-profit privatization of healthcare. As a national priority, we should be strengthening universal healthcare and our collective ability to care for one another. Governments at all levels must end for-profit care. Now more than ever, we need a universal public healthcare system that addresses the terrible inadequacies of care and supports for the elderly, that puts patients before profits, and that honors and extends the principles of the Canada Health Act. The suffering of residents and staff in long-term care has indelibly marked the soul of our nation. We will not forget. Canadians call on our government to take action now, so that out of this injustice, we build a better society. Thank you.
Hello everyone, my name is Melissa Miller. I am a lawyer who represents many of the families who are bringing lawsuits against long-term care homes in Canada. Before I make my remarks, I would like to introduce our next speaker. I have the honor of presenting the leader of the NDP, Mr. Jagmeet Singh, who is committed to the change that we're talking about here today. Thank you.
Before I begin, I want to acknowledge the incredible work of all the organizers of today's event, particularly Melissa, but the whole team for their work in putting this together. I spoke with a beautiful family that helped put these shoes together, which really, in a powerful way, when you look at those empty shoes, this is what we need to do to remember that the loss of seniors, the loss of life, these are smiles at dinner tables. These are loved ones. These are, in the words of a young child I met today, her best friend, her grandmother. She lost her best friend. These are parents. These are grandparents. These are our loved ones. And they are being lost in completely preventable scenarios. We are losing our loved ones. We are losing people we care for because profits are taking priority over people. This can no longer continue. There is no place for profits in the care of our seniors. The evidence is absolutely overwhelming that in for-profit long-term care homes, seniors are dying at a higher number. There's no question about it. We are losing our loved ones because dollars are more important than care. We heard from stories today from the frontline healthcare providers, frontline workers, personal support workers, and nurses who are being asked to do so much, who are giving it their all. And I want to commend them for their work and their courage in the face of this really difficult time. But the pandemic has impacted, has hurt most of our seniors and those that live in long-term care homes. The vast majority of deaths have been in long-term care homes. This can no longer continue, and there's no excuse for it. In the first wave, we saw that long-term care homes were impacted. We saw that. We saw loved ones die. So there's no excuse in the second wave that the exact same thing is happening. How can we let this happen? This is a national disgrace. And so we are committed to fighting for change. And what does change mean? It doesn't mean getting caught up in arguing whose responsibility is. To a loved one who has lost their parent, they don't want to hear an argument about whose responsibility it is at what level of government. They want to know that work is being done. So we are going to continue to fight for national standards. What Quebec has asked for, what people across the country have asked for, they want national standards. What are the best practices so we can care for people in long-term care homes, so they can be protected, and so that they are not bearing the brunt of this pandemic? What are the best practices? Let's establish those. But most of all, we need to get profit out of long-term care homes. And so what we're going to continue to push for is that the federal government has a direct role in this. They have a direct role nationally, but specifically with Revera. Revera is wholly owned by a federal agency.
it is completely within the power of Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and the Liberal government to immediately make it public and to ensure that it's no longer for profit. The worst sites of loss of life are happening in many Rivera-owned homes. This is directly the Prime Minister's responsibility, directly the Liberal government's responsibility. If they could buy a pipeline, they can make sure that Rivera is no longer for profit, that it is completely public and completely run with the care of seniors first and foremost. Donc aujourd'hui, quand je vois les souliers aujourd'hui, ça nous donne un exemple de la perte. Le fait que quand on parle des nombres de cas des aînés, de nos aînés, quand on parle des gens qui on a perdu pendant la pandémie, ce sont des mères, des pères, des grands-pères, des grands-mères, des meilleurs amis. Ce sont des êtres humains. On a perdu et c'est complètement, c'est quelque chose qu'on a pu éviter si on a pris les meilleures décisions. Donc, une chose qui est claire, il faut complètement éliminer le profit dans les soins de nos aînés, dans les centres de soins de longue durée. Il faut les éliminer. Et éliminer les profits et s'assurer qu'on prend meilleur soin de nos aînés, on prend meilleur soin de nos proches. Donc, on va continuer de mettre la pression sur le gouvernement parce qu'avec Rivera, c'est un exemple clair où le gouvernement libéral a la responsabilité directe de faire quelque chose parce qu'ils ont le pouvoir d'arrêter ce qui se passe, de s'assurer que ce n'est pas les profits, mais c'est les soins des gens qui est la priorité. Donc, on va continuer de se battre pour les gens, pour nos aînés, pour les gens qui sont dans les centres de soins de longue durée. Vous pouvez compter sur nous. Merci.
Thank you so much. That was really impactful. I am beyond moved to be here at our nation's capital, knowing all of you are watching, supporting, and standing here among the presence of those we've lost. I'm here as a lawyer who represents families across Canada that seek justice and accountability as a result of abuse and neglect in long-term care homes. But I am also very personally connected to why we are here today. I have a grandmother in a long-term care home. And I have another who I lost. She was my best friend and my soulmate. Seniors have always had a special place in my life. These are the people who fought for our freedom, sought refuge in Canada after enduring war and conflict, built the foundation of our country, offer wisdom, raised us, loved us, nurtured us when we needed them. And now they need us. My clients have told me over and over that until you get thrown into the complex web of red tape and hurdles that is long-term care, you don't realize how complicated and broken it is. I came to this realization after speaking with countless families who told me horror stories about the treatment of their loved ones, and then reading investigation reports and medical records documenting that horror. The worst part, though, is hearing from my clients how guilty they feel. Guilt for putting their loved one in a home in the first place. Guilt for trusting that someone else could do for their loved one what they no longer could. And guilt for having them suffer needlessly. And that guilt never goes away. And now the pandemic has intensified and transformed this already complex web into a national emergency. One that is now familiar to every Canadian. We have all heard the horror stories of people starving to death, dying from dehydration, living in their own filth, and of course contracting COVID-19, which led to respiratory failure, pneumonia, and the death of over 8,000 people in Canada, residents of long-term care homes. When you look around you, these 2,000 pairs of shoes, that's one pair of shoes for every 4 people that have died in a long-term care home in Canada. Long-term care residents represent approximately 80% of all of COVID-19 deaths in Canada. 80%. We are here because we allowed COVID-19 to ravage long-term care homes across the country. COVID-19 undermined the safety of long-term care residents and staff alike. The system failed. The frontline workers who staff these homes are working. They are overburdened, undertrained, and lack the necessary resources to do the job safely and in many cases meaningfully. We have seen that residents are left unfed, unbathed, unchanged, and without any meaningful human interaction. And while the country became aware of this reality as a result of the pandemic, these issues long preceded it. We heard the bell ring around the world early this year as COVID-19 was spreading. When we heard that seniors were the most impacted by this virus, I was hit with a wave of terror. I knew what was coming, and I knew that our long-term care system couldn't handle it. As a citizen, I watched helplessly, along with the rest of the nation, as the system failed miserably. And here we are in a second wave, watching it happen all over again. As a lawyer and advocate, I find this unacceptable. And this is why I'm here, with these courageous supporters, volunteers, and allies, and you watching at home, to fight for change. Despite lessons learned from the first wave, we still haven't seen any meaningful improvements that ensure the safety and dignity of our seniors. What's worse is that families have been crying out for years, decades even, about the mistreatment of their loved ones. In addition to this, staff have been asking for better compensation, better working conditions, and more government support. How can a long-term care system that was barely hanging on by a thread before this pandemic possibly get through this second wave unscathed? It can't. And people are dying because of it. Somewhere along the line as a society, we lost sight of our responsibility to seniors. Somewhere along the line, society made them disposable. This is unacceptable, unconscionable. We need a paradigm shift in this regard. A shift towards caring for our most vulnerable with the dignity, respect, and the love that they deserve. To live out their days in an environment where those who care for them are also treated with dignity and respect and provided with the resources they need to offer meaningful care. Long-term care homes are exactly that, homes. We would not accept anything less than the best care for our families in our own homes. That same standard ought to exist in our long-term care homes, and that standard should exist across Canada. That's why we're all here, to tell our federal government that we support the move to creating national standards for long-term care across Canada, and to call upon our provinces and territories to work with the federal government to ensure that those national standards are held to account. So I'm calling on all of you. Write to your MP and MPP to tell them you demand more and better care now. Second, learn about these issues by engaging with your provincial and federal health coalitions and staying current with news media research and policy reports. And third, share your stories and knowledge with community members, grassroots agencies, and loved ones. The time is now. We must collectively stand up for the most vulnerable. They need you. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we would like to welcome MP Gary Anandasa Gary.
Thank you, Kathy, and thank you everyone for being here. And I want to first thank the members, the families of those who've died as seniors in long-term care homes for their courage to tell their stories. And I'm here to tell you several stories. I'm one of 5 MPs who've directly been impacted with the report from the Canadian Armed Forces. As you know, back in the spring, the Canadian Armed Forces were deployed to 5 different long-term care homes in Toronto. In my riding of Scarborough Rouge Park, it was the Altamont Care Home, and Jennifer O'Connell, who is joining neighbor, her long-term care is Orchard Villa, and Yvonne Baker, who will be speaking later on, as well as two other MPs. They're not here today, but they do send their support to all of you here. And I want to first begin with Jennifer O'Connell, who's given me a note to read here, and if I may, I'll just read her note. Good afternoon. Thank you for letting me say a few words on behalf of MP O'Connell. She is sorry she can't be here today. There's an issue that she cares deeply about, and so she's very appreciative of the advocacy of everyone here. She stands with us today as we remember those who've lost, and echoes our calls to establish national standards in long-term care homes. MP O'Connell's community of Pickering Uxbridge has witnessed great tragedy due to the outbreak of COVID-19 and the inadequacies that have long existed in long-term care homes. This unfortunately resulted in the loss of many loved ones in her community. Before the Canadian Armed Forces report was released, MP O'Connell had heard from families who've lost loved ones, like Kathy, who's here today, and who lost her father, Paul, during this time. We've been calling for greater standards and the implementation of the necessary health protocols in order to address this crisis. Our vulnerable seniors deserve to live with dignity. This is why we have advocated strongly to have the federal government establish national standards, a measure our Prime Minister committed to ensuring in our government's recent speech from the throne. Thank you for all for being here. Many of you have lost loved ones due to the crisis in long-term care homes, and your current efforts are helping prevent others from experiencing similar pain. We've gathered here today to remember and pay tribute to those who've lost, as well as emphasize the urgency to bring about such changes, especially now as we're in the middle of the second wave. Too many families in our communities have lost loved ones in long-term care homes, and we must work hard to ensure this never happens again. Jennifer O'Connell is committed to do everything we can collectively to keep our most vulnerable seniors safe, to ensure that they're able to live with dignity. I want to thank her. She thanks us for this opportunity. My story is from Scarborough Rouge Park. It's in a home called Altamont Care Homes. We lost 53 people in that home, including one personal support worker, Christine Mandagarian. She, along with her colleagues, worked day and night to help those who were affected at Altamont, and I want to pay particular tribute to all those frontline workers who've really been the heroes of this. But sadly, we have to admit a collective failure in addressing the drastic needs of long-term care homes. While it's a provincial responsibility, I know every time we talk about long-term care homes, we get a lot of pushback from the provinces saying it's their responsibility. But I think it's important to recognize that the most vulnerable people in our society, those who worked day and night for decades and who retired and who are in a stage of their life where they should be taken care of like princes and royalty, we have left them out to dry. And sadly, this pandemic has claimed over 8,000 people. In the first wave, over 80% of the deaths are directly related to long-term care homes. The question is, how do we move forward from here? As a government, we've committed to ensuring that there will be standards, national standards for long-term care homes. The impetus for us now is to work towards those standards, ensuring that whether you're in the East Coast or the West Coast or in Ontario, you have the same standards of care. And those who are in long-term care homes are able to, and the families of those who are in long-term care homes are able to live with the security that we as a country have done way better and the best we can for those in care homes. So I really look forward to working with the government and others, to all of you here, to establish those standards. And as long as we're here, we have a voice here, I can assure you that we will continue to make sure that this is on the national agenda. Our government's committed to it, the Prime Minister is personally committed to it, and we will work with all of you to achieve those standards. And I want to close by just remembering all those who passed on, all the shoes that are here, and the multi-foot of people who are not here because of our collective failures. And I want to thank the organizers for this opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you. And we really appreciate the speakers that have come to share their thoughts with us today. And next, I'd like to introduce MP Baker. Thank you.
Thank you very much. My name is Ivan Baker. I'm the Member of Parliament for Etobicoke Centre. In Etobicoke Centre, we're mourning the loss of 42 residents to COVID-19 at the Eatonville Care Centre. Back in May, the Canadian Armed Forces were caring for my constituents at the Eatonville Care Centre and documented horrific conditions, in some cases abusive conditions, in long-term care homes, not only at Eatonville, but a number of other homes where the Canadian Armed Forces were serving. These conditions are, what they describe, are beyond reprehensible. They should be unacceptable in Canada. And I think these are the kinds of conditions, these are the kinds of stories that should trouble every single Canadian. I think it's important to remember that these conditions that were documented by the Canadian Armed Forces, this tragedy that's happened in Eatonville and other long-term care homes, is not just happening in those homes in Ontario and Quebec where the Canadian Armed Forces were serving. They're happening across the country. We know that because we've heard stories, but we also know that because approximately 80% of the people who died of COVID-19 in Canada were residents of long-term care. And we have to remember, when we talk about this issue, we often talk about the statistics and the numbers, and so we should. But we also have to remember that behind these stories, behind these numbers, these statistics are people. There are fellow citizens. There are mothers and fathers. There are brothers and sisters. They're fellow Canadians, and they deserve better. So as we look forward, that's why in May, myself and 4 other MPs, Jennifer O'Connell, Sonia Sadu, Judy Scrow, and Gary Ananda-Sangari, who you just heard from, wrote to the Premier of Ontario and wrote to the Prime Minister. And in our ask, we asked for some immediate measures by the Premier to ensure that we protect our residents of long-term care from the second wave and from the first wave. But we also asked both the Prime Minister and the Premier of Ontario to work together with other premiers to establish national standards for long-term care. National standards for long-term care are incredibly important. Here's why. I believe that you measure what you treasure. If we treasure our seniors and we treasure the quality of care that they're going to receive, then the only way to ensure that they get that quality of care is to set a measurable standard and measure our performance against it and enforce it, period. Now, as we move forward, we've seen in the speech from the throne in September that the government did commit to exactly that. The government committed to national standards for long-term care, and I'm incredibly pleased about that step. Now we have to implement those standards, and that work has begun between the federal government and the provinces to establish those standards. So as we look forward, as we move forward, I hope that as we leave today having taken the time to remember the victims, to honor them, to thank the family members of those who've lost loved ones for being here and for their advocacy, for all of you for your advocacy. But I also hope that we leave today redoubling our efforts, redoubling our commitment to encourage the provinces and work with the federal government and encourage them to work together to establish national standards for long-term care. And if we do that, and if we do that successfully, then we will ensure that the kinds of horrendous and despicable conditions that have been documented in long-term care never happen again, and that seniors across Canada get the quality of care that they deserve. Thank you very much for having me here today. And if you don't mind, I would like to just read a brief statement from our Minister of Health, Patty Hajdu. She could not be here today, but she asked that I share her message with you. As Minister of Health, I'm heartbroken by the disproportionate and devastating impact COVID-19 has had on residents of long-term care facilities. The burden of such loss is felt by Canadians, but most acutely by the loved ones left behind. Family, friends, and caregivers are rightly asking how this came to pass, why it's still happening, and how we as a society must do better when it comes to protecting our most vulnerable. That is why we are working with provinces and territories and taking action to better support seniors. We have also committed to setting new national standards for long-term care so that seniors get the best support possible. We can all agree that COVID-19 has exposed some serious and systemic shortcomings in long-term care facilities that require coordinated leadership and action. By working together, I'm confident we can chart a path forward that best protects our elders by ensuring they live safely with dignity, care, and respect. Signed by the Honourable Patty Hajdu, Minister of Health. Thank you very much for having me here today.
I want to take this opportunity to thank everyone who came out, everyone who spoke, and most importantly, all of the volunteers who helped set this all up. It was an incredible experience working with everyone, watching them set up these shoes. It was really emotional for all of us, actually. And I want to thank everyone for showing some vulnerability and showing some respect for why we're here. So to honor that, we're going to close out with 30 seconds of silence to honor all of those that we've lost needlessly in long-term care in Canada. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.